Okay, welcome back. We're going to get into our Normandy setting for our Sherman tank, which will be done on this base, as we all know. Now, I just as a preference to my cabinets and showcases, I always raise my models up an extra inch or so onto my display. So I take a frame such as this, and in previous videos, quite often the street itself is level with the frame, and that's a simple way of just displaying a Sherman, a Panther, whatever your model is. My own, because I like the contours and the different groundwork, I like to raise it up a little bit, take chunks out of the foam, make little hills and dale, that sort of stuff. As you can see, my little frame is even cut out for a little stream that's going to run down on this little diorama here. So I just do that. It's just a preference thing, nothing more. Not necessary to do, just my own call. Now, as we described, this foam is available at Home Depot. Cut it to size, and as you can see, the size, the tolerances are huge here. We're going to have to frame it in the styrene, so you're going to have to take this measurement of the width of this into consideration when sizing up your frame, or sizing up your foam. On top of that, we're going to use drywall compound, so if there's any cracks or anything like that, it's not going to matter. This thing was all filled in around the edge with drywall compound to make it firm up. So don't worry that this is not exact. By no means make it exact to your frame, because once again, you have to take in the thickness of this framing. So one of the things about the framing, though, and you have to think ahead on this, is to take your foam and you have to cut these corners to fill in these little pegs that sit down in here. So I'll just cut the edges off like so, go all the way around. So you're just going to cut 4 little triangles out of each side. So the actual foam itself is going to have the corners chopped off. Now, why is that? When you're gluing it into the frame, you're going to have to put these little balsa wood pegs right in here to glue, to give this a gluing surface. So what you're going to do is basically glue this onto here, and then glue the end piece of styrene onto this side of the balsa wood, and it just gives you a better gluing surface. No more than that. That's why they're not for stability or anything like that. It's to give yourself a better gluing surface, because if you don't add these on, which sit right in here on the corner of your base, then you have the problem of gluing the other piece of styrene. Pretend this is a piece of styrene. You're going to be gluing it like this, and you only have about a 1/16 of an inch here to glue onto. Gluing like so. So you don't want that going on. If you add this to it, like so, and just use crazy glue. CA glue's fine for gluing wood to plastic. That's going to give you all that surface to glue to. So once again, I don't have a second piece of styrene to demonstrate here, but as you can see, gluing that right to the edge, and once again we're going to pretend this is styrene, then you're going to glue this to that, and you have a whole 1/4 inch to put your glue on. It's going to hold forever. It'll hold for 10 years. And then you just, at the very end of your project, you're going to slide this in, and it's going to slide around your foam just like a little sleeve. Now, if you're going to do little cutouts like I have on my diorama here, you have to do that cutting before you glue this little box together, just because it makes it a heck of a lot easier. And you're just going to cut it with an X-Acto blade and a little file. So, as you can see, it's going to go all the way around. For perfect example of thinking out of the box here a little bit, I wanted to show a little bit of the, the groundwork. So you're going to be fooling around with your little piece of your siding to give yourself a little piece of interesting groundwork too. So keep all those little things in mind as you build. And that's pretty much what I'm going to do, and I'm going to glue this down. Sorry, I'm not going to glue it into the frame. I'm going to put the plaster on it and put the little piece of road into it and mount the columns and what have you. I'm going to demonstrate that in a moment. And yeah, I'll start putting the groundwork on. Now, one of the great things, product out, which has actually come out probably for the model railroaders. It's made by a company called Bachmann. They've been in the railroading scenic and making locomotives and boxcars at least 50 years, if not more. But this is great for 35th scale armor dioramas. It's called Wild Grass. The product number is 31001. It's a little too small to read here, but nevertheless, Bachmann 31001. It's called Wild Grass. Scenescapes, and it's great 35th scale. And we're going to use a little bit of it, and it pulls apart. You can just comes on a web, and you can just pull it apart in your fingers to any shape you want. And I'm going to demonstrate that at our next episode. It won't be this one. This is going to be plastered up in a few minutes, and it's going to take half a day to dry. So we won't be adding this to the model until our next episode. But this is great stuff. And as you can see, grassy fields. I'll show you how to crush it to show tank tracks going through it and what have you in upcoming videos. But it's great stuff, and the cost is give or take with tax $20 Canadian. But there's a lot. You can do 3 dioramas, obviously depending on size, but 3 little bases like that, we'll be able to use this at least with 3 or 4 different displays for our tanks. So keep that in mind. It's something that we're gonna shine light on a little. And of course, you can paint this too. This if you go to your local train or hobby shop and they don't have the appropriate color like I just described, the product number, and they're sold out, buy the one that they have and then just paint it. I'm going to be painting this right out of the box. It's probably a little bit too sort of Augusta golf green kind of color. So I'm going to be adding khaki colors to this and different colors. So don't worry if your local hobby shop sold out of the product number that I just gave you. They come in about 4 or 5 different colors, all obviously different. There's a fall and a spring and a light green and medium green. Just buy whatever they have and alter the color with your airbrush, because we're going to be doing that on our little Normandy display anyway, and I'll go into that. So right out of the box, it's just sort of bright for what we do in 35th scale. Model railroaders don't dig out their airbrush as much as we do. Those who do probably have a nicer layout. But nevertheless, let's get into plastering up this scene and dropping it into our frame. And one of the important things I just want to mention is we spend 2 months painting our little tank, more or less this tank, not this one. We spend 2 months painting our tank, and quite often we only spend a couple of, an afternoon on a Sunday putting together the base. And we're going to try and change that. We're going to spend maybe 3 or 4 days doing the base, and it's going to look that much better. So let's carry on. Okay, so we're about to start with the plaster on our foam base. Now, one of the things while calculating out where things fit on here is important. You can do it without sort of a copy of what I'm about to show you, but just with your drawing, put it on top of your foam. Because if you just start putting plaster on your foam, you're going to lose the lines and you're going to not know exactly where to line these up. And this has all been taken 2 minutes to calculate it out with Dave Forrest's Sherman tank. So there's a little bit of calculating just so the Sherman fits in and around these posts. So it's important to try and have a little plan. And the plan took 40 seconds to make. So I just covered up on the foam, and you put the put our gate posts back up, and then just take a pencil or a toothpick and then just punch a few holes in the corners. Like so. So it's obviously leaving a mark in the foam. Do it on the second one. Just in the corners here. Now keep in mind that they're exactly 90 degrees to our street. It's not guesswork as to where these originally came up with. I used obviously an angle and calculated it out like so, exactly where these line up. So everyone must have one of these in their school kit, and line them up properly, parallel, or not parallel, but obviously angled at 90 degrees off, and it's perfect. Now we have these holes showing up in our foam, and now just as a marker, I'm going to also put in some toothpicks. Great advantage to using this foam, of course. Now, don't necessarily do what I'm doing with 8 toothpicks. Just cut them in half, and you'll get away with using half the number. But anyway, if your diorama looks like that, your little piece of foam, that's at least going to be used as a guide for laying down the plaster. So now we have our road line, which is already in. So we're not going to put any plaster here, just in this neighborhood here. And basically, and now a lot of us steal a knife out of our wives' drawers and we get into hot water, and of course we leave it here and it cakes on and everything, and we get hell and all that stuff. Guys, just go to your local little Value Village type of store, and for 50 cents you can buy yourself a butter knife and stay out of hot water as far as using the good silverware. So anyway, this one even has CN. It's probably worth way more than 50 cents. It's got CN. Obviously they use these on the Canadian traveling across the Rockies, and I picked it up at a Value Village for 50 cents. It's probably worth 10 times that amount of money. But in any event, just again, I use drywall compound. There's other things on the market. different powders to use. This is all economics more than anything. There's other things like DOS, you know, drying stuff that you use for making molds. There's a few things on the market to use. They all work quite well, and I just put it on like I'm icing a cake. And don't worry if you draw your plaster over this line, it cleans up quite easily. Now, waiting for the plaster to dry is the only slowdown of this whole process. I talked about doing a base for a nice tank and it's only going to take 2 days or 3 days. The only reason it takes that long is because the plaster takes that long to dry. So other than that, if we weren't using the plaster and waiting for it to dry, this whole project would take an afternoon. And but it's a nice result. Obviously it gets your tank in a nice setting. If you're going to do a Normandy Sherman like Dave Forrest is for us on the other episodes, you know, it's going to look really well underneath some nice, or over top of some nice groundwork. All right, so reality is, how much time did that really take? 4 minutes. End result, gonna be awesome. And as you can see, it looks worse than any icing cake that you used to get at your birthdays. So then we have to find that line, and I can see just that line where the road goes is here, and then let's just make sure. Now, one of the things now we have a problem with is the depth. We have the depth of the street going down to the depth of the grass and what have you, the field. And we can't have that going on. We want it the same. Now, why do we want it the same? It's because we've built the Sherman in such a way that the suspension is firm. We can't have a dip and then have the Sherman tracks dangling in air. So just because of the way the Sherman's sitting in our little case, we're not going to fool around with the suspension on the kit. So let's bring the groundwork up to the road. Now, in most cases, the tanks are finished before groundwork is done. Panther, my Panther back here, which will be on a upcoming episode, will be on its groundwork, and that's a very late G, and they had the A's over in Normandy. But in any event, we're going to use, for the sake of these episodes, we're going to use that late style G in the groundwork, and we're going to show you, without moving the suspension and what have you, how to have it go over rugged groundwork. And it's not hard to do, but the point is, quite often guys make their tanks, they follow the instructions properly, and everything is true and square, and then 4 months later, now we want to put it in a scene, and you want the maybe the suspension all wobbly and going up over the contours of the ground. There's little tricks to get over that, and I'm going to go into one of the upcoming episodes. I'll go into how have your tank that's been firmed and square going up over different contours of ground. So not to worry. All those episodes are to follow between now and Christmas. So now, like I say, guys, all I'm doing is bringing this groundwork up to the height of the road. No, it doesn't hurt to move the plaster around a little bit better in certain areas, just to dip your knife in a little bit of water. And as you can see, it's getting liquidy here. Now, one of the things I'm sure people are going to ask is, why don't you just glue the road down and plaster up to it and just let it sit here, let it harden by itself and what have you? Well, one of the reasons is I'm going to use my airbrush for painting this. I'm going to hand brush painting the road, and it's a heck of a lot easier to paint this individually than it will be to have them both attached. Sure, I can stretch out a piece of masking tape and what have you and do it that way, but just based on experience, it's better to have them in two pieces. Now, one of the things we have going on here is sort of a schoolyard setting, or having these gates here tells a miniature little story. So by having the gates where they are, I'll just take these out temporarily. And again, these are just the use of those little toothpicks are just guides more than anything. So there's our walls back together. So we don't want to mess up here. So let's just get our little gate exact. Plaster on both sides right up to the edge of the brick. And just by adding a little water to your knife, you can see how smooth it's getting. Okay, so now we have at least some contours. A little bit of interesting little thing. Now we're going to put some sand and stones down. There's two layers of stones that go down. There's ones that we press right into the plaster, and then I'm going to go back once the plaster's all dry, and with some white glue I'll put some larger stones and what have you. We also have to create a little walkway. I think it'd be interesting if we had a sort of a walkway, or the sample of an example of people who have walked through here for the last 50 years. So we have to take all those things into consideration too. These stone walls weren't built yesterday, so we have to build a little dip, you know, where people have been walking through here. So like I say, this could be the entrance of an old schoolhouse or something like that. So we have to show that. So just about finished here. Now they're gonna eventually take these gate posts out, but once again, see how these little guides lined it up perfectly. I put this square on it, and as you guys can see, it's true. So what I'm gonna do momentarily is just take this road out like so. And don't worry that there's a little bit of guck on here, a little bit of plaster. That just will sand off with 300 sanding grit, and don't worry about that. But at least you have your straight edge. And then to clean up that edge where the road was, just push your knife down. And the other nice thing is once this is all hard, and sometimes it shrinks, that sort of thing, don't worry about that either. We have lots of stones and gravel and MIG pigments and all those extra little great things on the market today to fill in any seam that might be between the groundwork and the... So once those are in, and these are all loosey-goosey. These are going to come out and they're going to have a little bit of plaster on them, but don't worry about it. But I'm going to leave them in for the moment just to establish a pathway, a guide for putting in these little stones. So one of the first things I want to do is establish a little pathway between the bricks, and I'm just going to try and catch the edge there and catch the edge over this way, and then remove any of these ones. You just want to get those out of there. If you accidentally have them fall in, just push them down a little bit, because like I say, you're trying to establish a little teeny little pathway here. So you want the big stones on the sand on the sides, in here, like so. All right, so that's established. That's a pathway into a schoolyard or some sort of building gateway. So that part is already in. Now, sometimes, as you guys can see, there's a little bit of pink foam showing. Don't worry about that. You can just put white glue down and put the sand over top if you don't cover it perfectly. So now we want to establish a little pathway between the road, the existing road, down to the gate. So basically it's going to be along here. So we'll just use this as a little bit of a... Remember, these toothpicks are going to come out. We're just using them as a guide. So we're going to cover this part with the sand. And there's, like I say, there's two layers. One that's going to go on now. And then once this is all dry, and I'll show you how to push it down. Now, you're just going to push the sand in a little bit. And I'm hitting this ever so lightly, just enough to have the plaster grab the sand. Okay, so we'll put some sand along here. Push that down. And then I have a gathering of a few stones here. And then just drop the odd one in. Now, if there's any triangular ones, that's better. But anyway, we'll just drop the odd one in just for interest. It's hard to make them sometimes look, you know, just tossed in as opposed to being placed, but do your best. And just don't go too crazy on these stones. If we were to move to an Italian setting, you'd use 3 times the amount of stones that I've just used. But we're going to do Normandy here, so alrighty. Now if we used a obviously a farmer's field type of setting in Normandy, which a lot of the battles were fought on. Used even less stones again. It was for plantation. It wasn't for, it wasn't this sort of setting. So just keep your settings in mind, and your stones and gravel and that sort of stuff has to be done and looked at through photographs first and then placed. All right, so why isn't there any stones along here? Why isn't there any sand along here? This is, like I say, a pathway, and there's another layer of stones to be, or sand rather, to be glued on top of this. So at that time I will, because I want this to be with less sand due to the fact it's a pathway. And a lot of those things are going to be established by grass along the edge, and then coming this way. So it's going to be very obvious that there's a pathway as we move forward with light colored paints versus the dark colored paints and all those things. So it'll be very easy to read. But anyway, we're just in the initial stages of our little project. And I'm going to let this dry now, and then we're going to come back and... Okay, so one of the... thinking through this a little bit, one of the things that would be fun to make a flagstone pathway. So I've taken a little inventory of all my little stones, and these little stones, we all can find them in amongst places in the neighborhood. If you're laying down screening for your flagstones at home, obviously you have an unlimited amount of 35th scale rocks. So I've made a little pathway, just for measurement purposes, no more than that. I'm not going to necessarily put them in those exact spots, but I'm just going to create our little path. So you want to have it typical of a pathway. You want to have it strong on the sides and depressions in the middle. Just with your thumb, just push down a little bit, create that little depression, and then we'll start putting our stones in. And again, this is a base for a tank, and you and I are putting all these little stones in, and you might think it's crazy in the end, but trust me, when your model is sitting in a glass cabinet at home, it's going to look terrific. And just build it up like a flagstone pathway that you have at your house. And just remember, this is a hobby. It's not a mind bender. We're just going to do this and keep a little space between the stones, just so that on future episodes we can have the grass, coming up between the stones. So, and keep in mind too that pathways maybe over in Europe are a little older than the ones over here. So, the wear and tear on these little pathways is deep. Much deeper than maybe the ones that are sitting in your garden, in your house that was built in 1968. So some of these pathways, I'm sure, in Europe are 1,000 years old. And if the rock is a little too thick, just push it down a little harder into the plaster. And don't overlap the stones. Keep them all. And don't worry about the color either. The color has nothing to do with the stones. They're probably all going to be paint it anyway. Push that one down a little bit. Make sure there's you push them down enough that there's no edges catching, because you know what it's like to walk on stones. You don't want to be, every time you walk down a garden path with your newspaper, you always catch your toe on that stone that's risen up. So make sure that they're all pushed down, because it's the same as at home. None of them are, all of them are level or below, so don't have any of them sticking up. Alright, now we'll just push in the sides a little bit. And again, don't worry too much about the sides, because there's a lot of groundwork, a lot of vegetation and what have you to go around still to come on this diorama. So I'm calling it a diorama, it's a setting for a Sherman tank. But anyway, don't worry about the edges if they don't look right. With a little bit of grass and a little bit of TLC, you're going to quickly have it all look correct. So now, when choosing the sand that you're going to use is important. You may, like we all do, think the sand is just sand. Well, you definitely don't want to use any sand from a beach. Those granular pieces of sand used to be stones, and they're quite large in 35th scale. The other thing you don't want to use is sand right off the surface of your garden, mainly because of cat waste and dog pee and whatever. You want to clear off the first 6 inches of sand and then go in after the sand that's down a little bit, just simply for those reasons. Also too, eggs from insects and what have you are sitting in the surface of the sand, so you don't want that going on either. You don't want this to suddenly come alive in your little setting. So so if you're going to take surface sand, bake it at around 150 degrees for half an hour in your oven and kill everything that, you know, could be insect related or vegetation, seeds that are almost microscopic. So just if you put it out on a tray and bake the sand for at 150 degrees if you're going to take surface sand. Because you, like I say, you don't want vegetation coming up on your little miniature diorama here. And then again, like I say, if you're taking city dirt, you don't want animal waste in amongst your sand either. So, like I say, dig down 6 inches and then use that sand. Now, construction sites, they do all the work for you. You always have backhoes, and they're way down. They're down 6 feet. And if you're at a little construction site, just nip a little, you know, coffee cup of sand and you probably have a lifetime of sand. So anyway, so acquiring the sand is pretty simple, but just be aware of those factors when choosing it. Like I say, beach sand is useless in these kind of settings, so don't even think about using beach sand. Now we've got our flagstone road and our pathway, or flagstone pathway rather, and it's starting to take shape. And now we're going to let the plaster dry, and obviously we can't do any painting while it's in this state, but after letting it dry for half a day, she'll be ready to paint. And that's all we have for today, and like I say, we'll see you as soon as possible. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you soon. Take care.